So you want to get straight to the show. So you want to know what you need to know. You want to know what we're all here for. Well, you better get hip to Podcast by George. Podcast by George. Podcast by George. He knows what he's fighting for. It's Podcast by George. Podcast by George. Want to know what we're fighting for?
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome back into another podcast by George. Man, we got a great one today. Right off the top, I want to say if you're listening to this on iTunes, we have a lot of listeners that just get the audio-only version of the podcast. Maybe they like to listen in their car. That's cool. You might want to go to podcastbygeorge.com when you get a chance and click on the YouTube icon for this one because we're going to play some video here that is really revealing and really interesting. And it's the subject of today's podcast by George. And on the live line is our returning guest. I'll just love having her back. It's Laura Bellin with Bleeding Heartland. And for folks that don't know, Bleeding Heartland is a community blog about Iowa politics, especially campaigns and elections, state government, social and environmental issues. Bleeding Heartland also covers presidential politics and what the Iowans in Congress are up to. And folks, a lot of times it's up to no good, and she's got it all. Laura Bellin has been the primary author and sole editor at Bleeding Heartland since early 2008, so she knows whereof she speaks, and she's got another scoop. She's got another angle on this, misconduct, I would call it, in the governor's office when it comes to COVID-19 and her handling of it, and it goes to the most recent blog posting, which we're going to bring up on screen right after we welcome Laura in. Laura, welcome back to a podcast by George.
Oh, thanks so much, George. It's great to be here.
Okay, so let me bring this up. And there it is. The headline, Exclusive Test Iowa Vendor Gave Officials Talking Points for PR Video. Governor Kim Reynolds and other officials with important roles in Iowa's COVID-19 response received talking points from Domo Incorporated before filming a promotional video for the company on state property last July. Now, we're going to get into those things. As folks may recall, this Utah-based firm, part of a group that received a $26 million no-bid contract to create the Test Iowa program, provided each interview subject with questions and key statements in advance, documents that Bleeding Heartland and Laura received through a public records request. State Medical Director Dr. Caitlin Padati, the governor's chief operating officer Paul Trombino, and others voiced some of the messages on camera. So, man, it's hard to know exactly where to start with this, Laura. A couple of things that are really important just in those first couple of paragraphs. One of them is a no-bid contract. Okay, anybody that's been in private business, and I have, that's in charge of purchasing, or most people that have been in government, for God's sake, are required to have bids on things, particularly big item purchases. One of the biggest reasons right off the top is to make sure that you're not getting screwed, so that you understand what it is you're buying and what the competitive pricing for it is as you go out and determine the programs that you're going to purchase. And it's not new news right now, but Reynolds did this no-bid purchase, and you haven't forgotten about it, obviously.
Well, it's interesting. All of the governor's emergency proclamations related to the coronavirus pandemic have included a clause that exempts the state from any competitive bidding requirements for any contract or purchase of goods or services related to the pandemic. And the interesting thing is that even this last one that the governor released on Friday, which lifted all of the restrictions on capacity, even the limited mask requirements, everything about how many people could be packed into bars and restaurants, even though she lifted all of those mitigation measures, that proclamation also continues this exemption from the competitive bidding. So the state agencies, they can send out an RFP and solicit bids, or they can just issue a no-bid contract if it's related to COVID-19.
And I hate to interject my old-timey perspective on stuff, but it always reminds me when I started out in journalism, I had to cover like the county supervisors, and one of the I remember going to a meeting one time, and they had bids on a road grader, a new road maintainer, and it appeared that a farm implement manufacturer had the far lower pricing on a road grader. I mean, it looked like a real buy, and the old supervisor, or the county engineer said, our experience has shown that Caterpillar, even though it costs more because of the lower maintenance costs associated with it, the fact that they're more durable is actually the better value long term for these types of products. Don't buy this company, because if you do, you're going to be fixing it all the time. It won't be available when you need it. And I thought, my God, right there's the value for bidding on contracts. Now, the other thing is, it galls me about this is it's the CARES Act money that we're talking about here that's involved in this $26 million thing. And Laura and I have talked about this before. This is money that came down to Reynolds via the CARES Act, correct?
I believe so. I believe the money that was used for this Test Iowa contract. And to be fair, I mean, if you're going to spend CARES Act money on something, a program that is designed to expand testing and make data available across state agencies and to the public, I mean, it's not necessarily a bad idea to spend money on that, but you need to make sure that you're getting good value for money.
Well, and it's the inequity of the CARES Act that I have and the way that it was funneled down. All that money was shot upwardly immediately to those big companies that just had to access their bank accounts almost literally the next day. And then there was a call for some of this money to be given to state and local governments, which sounds great. But I said at the time, no, our governor's Kim Reynolds. And people say, well, you need oversight. No, our governor's Kim Reynolds. Oversight's not going to work. And then we'll give it to them in the form of unemployment benefits. My God, have you ever tried to draw up unemployment, even in the state of Iowa, but in Mississippi or Alabama, places like that, it's virtually impossible. I've been yelling ever since to give that money to the people and let them survive and thrive on it. The money will move upward and we'll all be better off. And we're still fighting on a daily basis now for $1,400 as opposed to $2,000 and so on. And anyway, that's me and the CARES Act. But anyway, let's get back to
the Des Moines Register has done some great reporting on how awful it is for people trying to access the unemployment benefits.
Yes.
But in terms of the oversight, I mean, you can blame the Republican-controlled state legislature for this. They could have imposed more oversight on how Governor Reynolds was using the CARES Act money, and they chose not to do that. And in fact, and when I've reported on some of the improper spending, I believe improper on permanent staff salaries, when others have reported on improper use of the CARES Act money for the Workday software system contract. I mean, the Iowa House and Senate could have held oversight committee hearings on that, and they've chosen not to do so. So, in that sense, I think that the flaw is more with our leaders in the state of Iowa rather than the CARES Act itself.
Yeah. And I kind of sneakingly suspicioned that, Laura, and I think you probably did too. And actually, the precedent for all this stuff was set in the bailout of 2008. This has all been seen before, but God, I digress. Let's go back to this article. I want to bring this back up.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this video is really unprecedented. I have not been able to find any example of Iowa state officials filming a commercial for a for-profit company, let alone doing it on state property the way this was done. So that alone, and I believe that the state auditor's office is looking into this. They can't release a lot of details about the investigations they're doing, but State Auditor Rob Sand did tell the Associated Press last month that this was something that merits additional scrutiny. So that's a pretty good sign that his office is looking at it.
And that is the headline on this paragraph that leads into the video, a video without precedent in Iowa. Domo, which markets a COVID-19 crisis command center to states, actually took down a webpage with testimonials from Iowa officials a few hours after Ryan Foley reported on the video for the Associated Press last month. And you can see how that page looked, Laura says, thanks to the Wayback Machine, which some people may not realize this, but there's an archive for everything on the web at the Wayback Machine. If you have the date, you can go back and find it. And that's what she did. And many of the quotes appear in a customer story document still available through Domo's website. Laura says she saved a copy of the video and posted it on YouTube. So, Laura, do you want me to play a little bit of this video? Is there a portion of this that you would prefer to watch, or just let it run from the beginning?
Sure. I mean, you can run. It starts out with the governor, and then pretty soon after that moves into Dr. Padati. Okay. Say maybe within the first minute or minute and a half.
Let's watch a little of this, because a lot of my issues with it are present right from the very beginning. Here we go.
Number one priority from the very beginning is to protect the health and well-being of Iowans. And we also knew that it was critically important that we manage our healthcare resources so that we didn't overwhelm our healthcare system.
The goal of public health is to do an investigation to understand not just how somebody might have gotten sick, but also what we can do to help control and limit the spread of that illness.
Okay, so it doesn't take me very long to take issue with it. Number one, even doing the podcast with my limited resources here, I can tell you this is really not high tech necessarily, but really high quality video production here. See those fuzzy backgrounds and the soft lighting and all that type of thing. And then of course it starts with Reynolds, and it's not her fault, but she's got this church lady voice. I mean, my God, I think this is just like fingernails on a chalkboard as far as I'm concerned.
What jumped out at me was that she's in her formal office. I mean, why is she filming video for a private company in her formal office?
Right. Now, so maybe you can clarify this a little bit. Let me take this down for a second, Laura. I've always thought that if you wanted to, for instance, report from, the inside the Capitol in the public areas, you can do that. But when it comes to areas because you're a public reporter, but if there are areas that are not accessible to the general public, that probably isn't so. Is that kind of the rule of thumb, or is that actually a legal thing?
Well, the state legislature controls access to the Capitol, but the Department of Administrative Services, which is a state agency, they handle the booking. So private individuals or private group, I mean, you can book the Capitol Rotunda or rooms at the Capitol to hold a private event. You have to go through the Department of Administrative Services. I'm not aware of companies filming commercials in the Capitol before. And one thing I wasn't able to determine from the records I received is whether the people in the Department of Administrative Services who helped make the logistical arrangements for this video, it wasn't clear whether they knew this was for a private company, because the staff in the governor's office who reached out to them said, the governor's going to be filming a video interview, and what kind of permissions do we need, where can our crew park, and this sort of thing. But it wasn't clear that this is for a commercial. And also, I wasn't able to determine whether the Iowa House Chief Clerk was informed that this was for a private company at the time that they granted clearance for this film team to come and be at the Capitol for the better part of the day on a day in July.
Okay, so that maybe let's take that right to my next question. In July, Laura, what was going on in July 2020 here in the state of Iowa? What crises were the governor and her staff dealing with, and how were they able to just set those aside to do a commercial?
Well, it's interesting because the governor had really lifted most of the restrictions by mid-June. And she had declared she had stopped doing her regular televised press conferences, and she had kind of, I don't want to say that she put the pandemic in the rearview mirror, but it really wasn't as much of a focus for her office. But the cases and the hospitalizations were starting to creep up by late July. I mean, they had reached a low point. They had peaked in early May, and then they had slowly declined until late June. And then after the July 4th weekend, there was kind of after the holiday, there was a spike in cases that already by the time this was filmed was leading to a rise in hospitalizations. But the way this video spins it, that, everything, the Test Iowa program has been so successful, and the data that the governor got allowed her to reopen the state. And, it's such a great program. And they really marketed it as a package deal, not just the Domo company, but the partners that were part of that $26 million no bid contract. They really promoted the role that each component had in the Test Iowa program.
Well, I remember we had this $26 million no bid contract news, and then the first news about the program itself was nothing short of disastrous. I remember the rollout sucked. I mean, there were broken vials, and it wasn't on time, and the stuff wasn't in the quantity or quality that it was supposed to. I mean, it didn't go very well. Of course, there's no mention of that. One of the insulting things about this is it's so PR and marketing schlocking. God, I used to work in that world. I know that for sure. They talk about partnerships all the time. Okay, what's the partnership here? We're buying this service, expensive service from this Domo company. We're doing this commercial free of charge using taxpayer employees, basically, in our Capitol building and all that type of thing. What's the partnership that's involved here? What are they talking about?
Well, they're talking about the partnership of the state agencies and the state hygienic lab at the University of Iowa and these companies. Actually, an interesting point that was raised in Ryan Foley's reporting for the Associated Press is whether this video may have violated a University of Iowa policy against product endorsements. And
yes,
the director of the state hygienic lab, he wrote in email correspondence that I received through a separate records request. This post involved 4 records requests. I got information back from 3 agencies. The governor's office doesn't comply with the open records law anymore, but I got records back from 3 agencies. And so it was Paul Trombino in the governor's office who called the director of the state hygienic lab and asked him to participate in this video. And he didn't get a lot of warning. He was asked on the Thursday or Friday before, and they did the filming on the Monday. So he wasn't really told that it was going to be for a commercial. I mean, he just said there was going to be a crew and they were filming a video about the Test Iowa program. So he didn't really know a lot about the program, and it was all done very last minute at the University of Iowa, getting permissions to film at the state hygienic lab. But again, it doesn't seem like it didn't go through the normal vetting process that it would have at the university.
Well, I can see the benefit here from a PR perspective for Domo, their parent company, their shareholders or owners or whatever there might be. What's the benefit here to the state of Iowa? That's our governor. Those are our state employees. Those are our facilities. What are we getting out of this as Iowans? And I'll take it a step further. In July, I mean, the country, and the state reeling from COVID. There was some PR that could have been done. What if the governor had been in a line testing people? What if the governor had been volunteering at a hospital with COVID patients? I mean, putting herself on the line like a first responder. My God, that would have been great PR. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not a PR director, but if I put on my PR hat, that would have been Padati. Could have been out there, helping people with dealing with COVID-19. Instead, they're doing this schlocky PR video for this company that they paid $26 million to on a no-bid contract. I don't know. That really bothers me.
Oh, well, it bothers me too. I mean, there's no benefit to the state to doing a video like this. It's only a benefit to the private company. And I haven't been able to determine exactly when this video went online, but I was tipped to it in November. And of course, in November, everything was exploding in Iowa. We had a rise in cases that began in late September and hospitalizations. But by the middle of November, our hospitals were bursting at the seams. And in late October, early November, we were having 4,000 to 5,000 new cases reported every single day. So it was a complete disaster. And by that time, Iowa had reached, I think we were 3rd in the total cases per capita. Now we might have dropped to 5th just because a few other states are doing even worse than we are. But I mean, we just weren't doing well. So this video that was making it seem like Iowa's response was such a success. And the webpage was in some ways even more amusing because it said at the top, what if testing could stop a viral hotspot? And I was thinking, well, what if it could? We'll never know in Iowa because we weren't ever able to get ahead of these hotspots the way the governor kept promising that this data would allow us to drill down right to the zip code and get ahead and manage and contain the virus. Well, it didn't accomplish any of that. I mean, we weren't able to test our way out of having this terrible explosion. And we had, on average, we had 50 people dying a day in November. We had literally 1,500 Iowans died of the virus in November. Yeah. And it's close to 1,200 that we know of for December, and the numbers aren't final. So, it was really, to say that the program was a success is just not accurate. And this video was online at least through January 7th is the day they finally took it down. I don't know exactly when it went up, but it was online for at least 2 months during a period when Iowa was just like a poster child for a terrible way to handle the pandemic.
Well, it wasn't taken down on coincidence. It was taken down following some pretty critical reporting, right?
Right. Right. Yes, it was. I had actually, when I found out about the video, the first thing I did was save a copy because I was worried that as soon as I started asking questions about it, they would take it down. But in fact, that nobody took it down while I was asking questions and seeking records about it. But then as soon as Ryan Foley reported on it, within hours, they did take it offline. So that was the point when I put it up on my YouTube channel, just so that people would still be able to see it.
So if anybody has any questions or reservations as to whether or not the governor's office and this company knew that there was something wrong with this, I mean, they're all running for the woods, folks. I mean, this stuff is coming down. The governor's office is not replying to any inquiries about it. I mean, this is a huge embarrassment for the state of Iowa. It's kind of compounding insult to injury with this original relationship, this partnership between Governor Reynolds and Domo. And I don't know, the other part of this that bothered me, and we can look at some of this in the video, though you could see it there from the beginning, these talking points that were provided to the governor and her staff. It reminds me of what they call hitting your mark as an actor. I mean, you're given your lines and you've got to stand a certain way and I mean, they look to be much better actors and actresses than they do as to be statesmen and politicians. I mean, this is a debacle, I think.
Well, and I was really struck by how they emphasized for most of the people who were participating in the video that they really wanted them to talk about all of the companies that were involved. And so maybe it might be around 120 or 130 into the video where Dr. Padati says, working with our partners, Nomi Health, Qualtrics, and Domo. And then Paul Trombino later in the video, he starts walking through, well, the first piece was this, and that was Nomi Health. And then the second piece was that, and this was Qualtrics. And now, Domo provided this. I mean, he's really... It is almost, I mean, it wasn't scripted, but it almost could have been scripted. And to me, that's a very improper use of a state government office to provide that kind of, I mean, Domo can create its own PowerPoint and say, like, here's what we did for the state of Iowa, but we don't need state government officials to do that work for them.
And to what benefit? To what end? Again, I'm kind of, why would they do this? Just for fun? Just to pretend that they're in Hollywood or something to benefit? That's weird.
It is kind of weird. I mean, it seems like kind of a cronyism thing. And I will say also that although the governor's office didn't respond to me about it, they did give a comment to Ryan Foley saying no state resources were used in creating this video. And that's just not true. I mean, they used state property. There were state government officials' time used on it. I mean, I uncovered lots of emails back and forth. I'm sure there are many more emails I didn't uncover because the governor's office didn't provide anything. But even just through the Department of Administrative Services, I was able to get dozens of emails showing that the governor's public relations manager and her operations manager were scrambling and sending emails and calling people and making arrangements for this. So they were clearly on office time doing this work to set up a film shoot for a private company. So to me, that's just obviously that is a use of state resources right there.
And the insult to the injury, again, it's in the midst of a pandemic, the worst economic crisis many of us have seen in our lifetime, when all hands need to be on deck. I mean, helping Iowans, I mean, that's their first and foremost responsibility, and they're doing this. Well, let's, again, for the viewers, I want to go back to the video.
And then talking to the other states, so I had a couple of long conversations with, some of my colleagues in Utah and talked about the issues that they were facing in the pandemic. And that was the key ingredient for us to make that decision and sort of really initiate the plan.
I mean, that was interesting because he was talking about how they initiated the plan based on talking with his counterpart.
To expand our testing capacity, enhance the information we have available to us, and improve the way that public health serves us.
I don't know, Laura. That sounds to me like talking point. That sounds to me like a script. And again, that partner terminology that's in there is right off of the top. And the mood lighting here. Let's go back to this.
We've had as many as 12 mobile testing sites across our state. We run daily capacities in the 3,000 to 4,000 range. Our standard is 72 hours to provide results within that window. And we've had great response from the public. There's, of course, a lot of demand, and I'm pleased to say that we're well over 400,000 tests in Iowa at this time.
What's been amazing.
That was a number.
Go ahead, Laura.
They had provided on some of the documents, they had provided some numbers like over 400,000 tests or 3,000 to 4,000 tests a day. And at certain points during the video, people were reciting some of those statistics. So they were able to, again, this is something that they could have created a document. They didn't need to try to get state officials to do their PR for them. And I should add also that Paul Trombino, at the time of this filming, he was the governor's chief operating officer, but he's now the director of Iowa's Department of Homeland Security. And I have a lot of concerns about that because a lot of the COVID relief money runs through the Homeland Security Department. And now he's going to be in a position to direct that. And so there really needs to be some good oversight of what he's doing.
Was he an acting director?
He was the interim director of the Department of Administrative Services for most of last year. He was all along, he's been working since early 2019, he's been working in the governor's office. But this is, I mean, the irony is, it's partly related to the story I reported in early December about the governor's office overspending their budget. She appointed him interim director of the Department of Administrative Services in early March of last year. And partly that was a way to get him off of the governor's office payroll. The Department of Administrative Services was then covering 100% of his salary and benefits. So it kind of eased up on the budget pressure. The other thing that was going on in the backdrop was that Jim Kurtenbach, who she had appointed to run the Department of Administrative Services, was probably not going to get confirmed by the Iowa Senate. I mean, that was just a reality. So she put in an interim director. He didn't have to face Iowa Senate confirmation during last year's session, and he held that position until early January of this year. She put somebody else in charge of that administrative department. That they handle the state human resources, they do the payroll, they also do procurement. So the most of the state contracts run through the Department of Administrative Services. And then she moved Paul Trombino over to the Department of Homeland Security, which I learned recently, to my surprise, is a position that is not subject to Iowa Senate confirmation. So I really worry about that. And I don't even understand how that happened, because hundreds of people who serve on minor state boards have to be confirmed by the Iowa Senate. And yet the director of this big department apparently doesn't have to be. And again, tens of millions of dollars of the COVID relief runs through the Homeland Security Department. So I have a lot of concerns about Paul Trombino in that position. But I mean, here you can see him in the video talking about this program in just glowing terms and how well it works and how well the pieces fit together. And that was the key message that they wanted. They wanted this customer story to showcase how not just Domo, but all of the companies that are part of this Test Iowa plan, because they're marketing this, what they call this COVID-19 Crisis Command Center. They're trying to market that to other states as like a total package that'll help you manage your response.
And we're helping in that. And, you know, as a left-wing progressive, I'm not a fan of the Department of Homeland Security at all. I mean, it was created after 9/11, and maybe there was some initial need for it, it was thought. But my God, the Capitol in Washington, D.C. was just sacked, and those guys were asleep at the switch. I mean, if they don't get rid of them, they ought to at least change the name of the damn thing. I mean, that's laughable given what's just taken place. It's probably the most duplicitous government service. I mean, much of what they do is already supposed to be done by local, state, federal law enforcement, the DOJ, the FBI, and people like that. Why we even have a Department of Homeland Security any longer, I think, is a mystery, and it's a giant boondoggle. And here in the state of Iowa, we're seeing evidence of that on a state level. Well, we're out of time, and I have a tendency to digress again. Laura, anything in closing here that you want to say on this story, or any more of that video that you want to look at, or how should we wrap up here?
No, well, I mean, and in fairness, the Homeland Security Department in Iowa, I mean, it was originally just the Emergency Management Response Center, so it has its roots in the 60s, just as coordinating a response to natural disasters and other emergencies. But then it's grown into something much bigger, and of course, it's playing this big role in the COVID response, which, you know, you can question why we have a Homeland Security Department, you know, coordinating a lot of the funding for that. But again, I just want to get back to the fact that there's nothing, I couldn't find any example in Iowa of state officials doing something like this for a private company. There are still some questions I'm investigating related to it, and I think that the state auditor's office may eventually have something to say about it. And so just stay tuned for more.
Well, stay tuned to Bleeding Heartland. Going to run the URL across the screen there, bleedingheartland.com. Folks, go there because Laura's on. It's like the more you dig, Laura, the more you're finding. I mean, it's you're kind of pulling threads here, and this hairball is becoming unsnarled, obvious to everybody here on almost a daily, weekly basis. These stories just don't seem to stop.
Yeah, well, and sometimes when I have a story like this, then I get tips from readers about other things I should be investigating. And I always, of course, greatly appreciate that.
All right, folks, you can be a part of it. It's a community blog, and you can weigh in. You can give your opinion. You can become a Patreon. You can support them. Just go to bleedingheartland.com. And Laura, thanks again, as always, for sharing it. Another blockbuster. And I mean, this is a big story. This goes all the way back to Ronald Reagan for me, when showbiz first got involved in politics, and people thought that guy was great. And I used to watch him on television and know that it was all scripted, and the great communicator people used to call, just an insult to injury for me personally. Thanks again for coming on a podcast by George.
Thanks, George. Anytime.
She'll be back soon, folks. And if you like Podcast by George, please, as I always tell folks, go to podcastbygeorge.com, pick your platform. If you're listening on iTunes and you want to see these videos, you can pick YouTube there and you can subscribe. Ring the notification bell. Facebook, of course, is video, and you can always see it there by simply liking and following the podcast there. And the audio versions will and always have been available on places like iTunes. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up for now. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.